When the Great Depression hit America in 1929, millions of families suddenly found themselves struggling to put food on the table. Out of this desperate time emerged an unlikely hero, the dirty sandwich. This humble creation might turn your stomach today, but during the nation's darkest economic period, it literally kept people alive. Simple, affordable, and made from whatever ingredients families could scrape together, the dirty sandwich and its many variations became survival food for countless Americans. From rural farms to urban tenements, these makeshift meals represented both the hardship of the era and the remarkable ingenuity of ordinary people determined to feed their families. Let's explore how these seemingly unappetizing sandwiches saved millions. Lard and sugar sandwich. A slightly more appealing variation of the dirty sandwich was the lard and sugar sandwich, which became a treat for children during the hardest years of the Depression. This version replaced pepper with a sprinkle of sugar, creating a primitive sweet sandwich that offered both calories and comfort. Mothers would spread a thin layer of lard on bread and then sprinkle whatever sugar the family could afford, sometimes just a few granules, to create what they would call a dessert sandwich for special occasions. The contrast between the bland fat and sweet sugar created a flavor somewhat reminiscent of simple pastry. In some households, this sandwich was reserved for birthdays or holidays when no proper treats could be afforded. Children would look forward to these special occasions, not realizing that their celebration meal was born of extreme poverty rather than tradition. The psychological impact of these sweet sandwiches shouldn't be underestimated. They allowed parents to provide a semblance of normalcy and occasional indulgence despite devastating financial circumstances. Children who received these sandwiches often remembered them decades later, not for their culinary merit, but as symbols of their parents' efforts to create moments of joy amid hardship. The original dirty sandwich, this sweet variation, provided essential calories when more nutritious foods were simply unattainable, helping families survive until their circumstances improved. And what they tell us about survival during America's greatest economic crisis. The original dirty sandwich. The dirty sandwich earned its unappealing name from its appearance, but for millions of Americans during the Depression, it was a lifeline. At its most basic, this sandwich consisted of lard or vegetable shortening spread on bread, sprinkled with salt and pepper. The dark specks of pepper against the white lard created the dirty appearance. For countless families, this simple creation was breakfast, lunch, and sometimes dinner. Parents could feed their children for just pennies, as lard was substantially cheaper than butter, meat, or cheese. Children would take these sandwiches to school, often hiding them from classmates to avoid embarrassment over their family's circumstances. In rural areas, home-rendered lard was used, while urban families purchased small amounts of shortening when they could afford it. The sandwich required no refrigeration, making it practical for homes without electricity or ice boxes, a common situation during the Depression. What's remarkable is that despite its simplicity, the dirty sandwich provided crucial calories and fat that helped prevent malnutrition. For growing children especially, these calories made the difference between development and stunted growth in a time when 1 in 5 American children was malnourished. Today, nutritionists would be horrified at serving children bread coated with lard as a meal, but during the Depression, this humble creation saved countless lives when the alternative was often nothing at all. Now, if you've been finding this journey through Depression-era survival foods fascinating, consider supporting us on Patreon. The link is in the description below. Your membership helps us research these forgotten chapters of American food history that show the incredible resilience of previous generations. Now let's continue exploring how these humble sandwiches sustained millions through America's darkest economic crisis. Bread and butter pickle sandwich. For families fortunate enough to have garden space, the bread and butter pickle sandwich represented self-reliance during the Depression. This creation featured homemade bread and butter pickles, thinly sliced cucumbers, preserved in a vinegar solution with sugar and spices between slices of bread. Home gardens became critical food sources during the Depression, with cucumbers being relatively easy to grow in many climates. Families would harvest cucumbers in summer and preserve them as pickles for year-round use, creating a sandwich filling that lasted through winter when fresh vegetables were unavailable. The sweet-sour flavor of bread and butter pickles made them particularly appealing as sandwich fillings, especially for children who might resist other preserved vegetables. The crisp texture also added interest to the soft bread, creating a more satisfying eating experience. The bread and butter name itself reflected the economic reality of the Depression. These pickles were considered substantial enough to serve as the filling between bread, replacing costlier protein sources like meat or cheese. They quite literally took the place of butter in many sandwiches. Rural families often shared cucumber harvests and pickle-making knowledge, helping neighbors preserve their own garden produce. Community canning days became social events where resources and equipment were pooled to create winter food supplies. This sandwich represents how home food production and preservation became essential survival strategies during the Depression, allowing families to create more varied and flavorful meals than they could afford to purchase. Dandelion sandwich. The dandelion sandwich exemplified how Depression-era families turned to foraged foods when money for groceries ran out. This surprisingly nutritious creation featured young dandelion greens, harvested from yards and parks, served between slices of bread, sometimes with a light spread of lard or vinegar to cut the bitterness. Children were often sent out with paper bags to collect young dandelion leaves before they flowered, when they were most tender and least bitter. This activity combined food gathering with free entertainment for youngsters, who often made games of who could collect the most greens. What most families didn't realize was that they were consuming a nutritional powerhouse. Dandelion greens are rich in vitamins A and C, as well as iron and calcium, nutrients often lacking in Depression-era diets heavy in starches and fats. These wild greens provided crucial nutrition at a time when fresh vegetables were luxury items. Urban families foraged in parks and vacant lots, while rural families gathered dandelions from fields and roadsides. In some communities, Italian, Greek, and Eastern European immigrants shared traditional knowledge about preparing wild greens, teaching their neighbors which plants were edible and how to reduce bitterness. Some variations included mixing the dandelions with wild onions or other foraged greens like chickweed or lamb's quarters. If available, a small amount of bacon fat might be added for flavor, or an egg might be used to make a simple dressing. The dandelion sandwich represents the resourcefulness of a generation that survived by recognizing that nutritious food doesn't always come from a store. Sometimes it's growing freely in your own backyard. The legacy of Depression sandwiches. The humble sandwiches that sustained millions through America's worst economic crisis left a lasting imprint on a generation. Children who grew up eating these makeshift meals carried the experience with them for life, influencing their attitudes toward food, waste, and economic hardship long after prosperity returned. Many who survived the Depression never lost their habits of extreme frugality. They continued to save bread heels, reuse bacon grease, and approach food with a seriousness that sometimes puzzled their children and grandchildren. The waste not, want not mentality became deeply ingrained, with many unable to discard even small amounts of leftover food decades later. Some of these sandwiches evolved into comfort foods that remained popular even when ingredients for more elaborate meals became affordable again. Peanut butter and banana sandwiches, for instance, transcended their Depression-era origins to become American classics, though few today recognize their roots in economic necessity. Perhaps most significantly, these sandwiches represent the incredible resilience and creativity of ordinary Americans faced with extraordinary challenges. Parents who managed to feed their families on pennies a day, often sacrificing their own portions to ensure children had enough, demonstrated remarkable resourcefulness that shouldn't be forgotten. Modern food insecurity initiatives have roots in the lessons learned during this period. School lunch programs, food stamps, and community food banks all evolved from the recognition that hunger affects not just individual families, but society as a whole, a lesson painfully learned during the Depression years. The legacy of these humble sandwiches lives on not just in recipes, but in cultural values about food, waste, community responsibility, and the importance of ensuring that no one goes hungry, even when resources are at their most scarce. It's remarkable how simple combinations of bread and minimal fillings helped millions of Americans survive the darkest period in our economic history. These Depression-era sandwiches weren't just food. They were symbols of incredible human ingenuity and determination to carry on despite overwhelming challenges. The next time you make a sandwich with artisanal bread, premium meats, and gourmet condiments, consider how your grandparents or great-grandparents might have viewed such abundance. For them, a thin smear of lard with salt and pepper was sometimes the difference between going hungry or making it through another day. These humble creations remind us of both how far we've come and how quickly circumstances can change. The generation that survived on dirty sandwiches never forgot the experience, carrying lessons of frugality and resourcefulness throughout their lives. If you enjoyed this glimpse into America's culinary survival history, please like and subscribe for more stories about how our food traditions evolved through challenging times. Thanks for watching.